Maybe it's based off of what a lot of you have seen. Maybe it is based off of the state of the current WWE product. Maybe it is the belief or maybe hope that it will someday get better. Whatever the case might be, a lot of you believe that NXT signals that better days are potentially ahead for the WWE. And I could understand why a lot of you think that way. I compare this to baseball. NXT is the developmental territory. It's the infrastructure of where that talent is brought in, developed, cultivated, nurtured, and begins to blossom. And then you bring it up to the major leagues, the big stage, if you will. And that is the best way to build your organization, is through your farm system, especially in baseball, to be able to be a consistent winner, to be able to consistently have new fresh faces and young stars come through at a lower cost to you. You have to have that infrastructure in place in the farm system. In a lot of ways, the best way to impact positive long-term real change to the major league roster is by working on that farm system, that developmental arm of the organization first. And I can see where with NXT being the company's primary developmental territory, that this is a way for the WWE to get younger, a way for the WWE to get better, to find talent, bring it in, cultivate it, nurture it, develop it, allow it to grow and blossom, and then bring it up to the main roster. So that way you have younger, cheaper talent in the mix and you have a consistent, steady pipeline of such, and it's better off for all parties involved. I get that. And I also get that based off of what some of you have seen, based off of your taste in professional wrestling, that you like a lot of what NXT is giving you right now, and you wish that WWE was giving you that right now. A little less of the bullshit, a lot more killer as opposed to filler. Characters that you like, that you respect based off of their time on the independent scene. Characters that can go in the ring, people that can wrestle. They give their wrestlers time to have real wrestling matches. I see it, and I understand why. Because in part your philosophy is that Vince McMahon is the biggest anchor weighing down the current creative process of WWE. You believe he is the biggest hindrance to growth and improvement in the product and the brand and the company as a whole. And I agree with you on all that. And I see where, with Triple H being in charge of that NXT territory, you logically have put together the pieces that, well, I like this. This is the guy in charge of and responsible for this without any real oversight from Vince. So if this is what I'm getting at this level from this guy without this oversight, imagine someday if this guy takes over this without this guy's oversight and implements what we've seen here on a grander stage, how much better things are ultimately going to be. That makes perfect logical sense, it seems like. It really seems like sound thinking. That if Triple H is doing this with NXT and you really like it, in some ways you can't wait for the day for him to take over the entire company and see what he can do and what he can implement on a much larger stage. I get all of that. And I understand why a lot of you would think that NXT can potentially signal that there are much better days ahead for the WWE. With that said, though, I really wonder, is NXT really an indicator of better days being ahead ultimately for the WWE? Because even if you like NXT, and even if you think NXT is the best wrestling out there, or among the best wrestling out there, is that really a good thing or is that really a bad thing? Because at the end of the day, NXT is the developmental territory. It is kind of a independent territory with a big production budget backing it. Is that really a good thing if that's one of the best wrestling shows around today? Is that really a good thing? I mean, just think about that for a second. Also, let's keep this in mind, is that when we're talking about NXT, there are certain things that you could do at that level. There are certain things that you could do in that type of environment, with that type of audience, with that size of audience, that frankly just won't necessarily work on a larger stage. You're also talking about an NXT that is geared towards a certain type of wrestling fan. It really is. NXT is not meant for everybody. It's not meant for casual eyeballs and for mainstream eyeballs. So some of the things that you do here might not apply and may very well not work at all once you get up here to a bigger level, when you have to think a much larger, grandiose scale, and you have to appeal to more segments of audience. And let's also keep this in mind, is that even though Triple H is in charge of NXT, and you like a lot of what he's done with NXT, that doesn't mean that he would necessarily be able to incorporate a lot of those changes at the big time level, at the WWE level, so to speak, the Raw, SmackDown level. It doesn't indicate that at all, because the pressures here and the focus is here for a Triple H are much, much different than when he's running the entire show, if you will. Now he has to worry about shareholders. Now he has to worry about dividends. Now he has to worry about how this could potentially impact the stock price. He has to worry more about bottom line things. He has to worry more about business aspects as opposed to what he has to worry about at an NXT level, where he is just sitting there and he is strictly running that developmental territory, finding the talent, putting them in place, putting the creative processes and people in place to nurture, cultivate, develop, and grow those talents into future WWE superstars, if you will. Again, when I come back to baseball, it's one thing to have somebody in charge of your entire farm system, but it's an entirely different thing to be the actual general manager or team president at the big league level. You might oversee this, but some of the things that you do here and at this level or that level might not necessarily work at a big league level. It's an entirely different philosophy. It's an entirely different perspective that one has to take on when talking about the difference in size and scope of the responsibilities. And when you look at a Triple H and what has been done with NXT, personally, I think at times NXT hasn't been as great as people like to make it out to be. If you are the type of fan that gets into the in-ring components and that's primarily it, you've gotten a lot of that out of NXT, and that's great. But frankly, in large part, a lot of you are also the same ones that harken back to the Attitude Era being so great, or even the Ruthless Aggression Era being so great, maybe even the Hogan or hell, even New Generation Era being so great in WWE. And it wasn't just about the in-ring action. In a lot of ways, it wasn't about the in-ring action at all. Pretty much all you've got now in professional wrestling, if you're a serious fan, is the in-ring components. And latching onto certain guys. Because God knows the main roster is not giving you that. Furthermore, a problem that I see with this whole philosophy of NXT signaling better days ahead is that Vince is still in charge of WWE. And I see no indication that this guy is going to step aside anytime soon. You might get frustrated because you see all these good things that you like at the NXT level and can't wait for the day to see them implemented at the WWE level. But it literally could take Vince McMahon dying for any of those changes to ever actually occur. And at this point in time, there's nothing to indicate at this moment that Vince will be leaving us anytime soon. So we could be talking about another 5, 10, hell, 15 years with Vince McMahon running the big show of WWE. So in that time, the business could flip, the business could change, and what wrestling fans want and need and desire out of the wrestling business can change to the point where what Triple H is doing with NXT right now, by the time he would actually be in a position to implement some of those things at a big level, at the main roster level, it might not be what the fans need. It might not be what the fans want. It might not be what the fans desire. It might not be good for business at that point in time. Especially based off of the fact that you don't know when Vince is going to leave. You might want him to leave sooner rather than later, and I'm among you. But that's not an indication that he's going to. He's not just going to retire and walk away, it wouldn't seem like. So how long would it be before any of these changes are even in place? How long would it actually be before a Triple H is actually in charge to be able to implement any of those things? And then you also look at it too. Whether it's Vince running the entire show or not, Triple H is still very involved at the highest levels of the WWE's main product. And there is a significant disconnect between what goes on at NXT and what goes on at the WWE level. Like you see Adrian Neville, Pac. You know, he was one type of guy in NXT. Now there's all these rumors talking about giving him some type of Mighty Mouse gimmick when he comes to the WWE. What the fuck for? Like Roman Reigns, when he was down in NXT, he was Liaki. He was one different type of character. You bring him up to the main roster, all of a sudden you've made him the Shield. Instead of having him work on this character at this level and develop and learn how to be this character at this level and then bringing him to the main stage, in a lot of cases you have these guys, Big E's another one. You have given one style of work, one type of character when they're here, and then you bring them up to the big roster and you expect them to change everything about who they are. That makes absolutely no sense. In part, the developmental system should be teaching these guys to be who they're going to be at the big level. Not teaching them what to be at the NXT level, so that way when they get to the big level, you entirely change everything that they're fucking doing. That makes, again, absolutely no sense. And for all the people that want to kiss Triple H's ass, for all the people that want to sit there and say Triple H is this awesome and that awesome and that awesome, we've also seen clear-cut examples over the years of Triple H being behind certain guys and not being behind other guys. Very similar to the guy currently running the show in Vince McMahon. You know, have we really seen that ability for Triple H to plug his nose and push certain guys that he really doesn't like, to do the right things for certain guys that he really doesn't get or he really doesn't get behind? I don't know about all that. Very similar, again, to Vince McMahon. We could sit there again as wrestling fans and maybe live in a bit of a fantasy world and hope and wish and pray for something to get better and seeing that this might be an indication of something much better to come. Because in part, what else do you have as a wrestling fan at this point is to then other hold on to hope and think that things will get better and believe that things will get better, and have that faith that things are going to get better. Because based off of what I tangibly see, I just don't see how you could actually believe that. You have to have hope. You have to have faith because there's not a lot of evidence to support it. I know you really want NXT to be an indicator of better times ahead. And you've seen some of these talents come through the pike. You know, the Ambroses, the Rollins, and the Bray Wyatts of the world, and the Cesaros of the world. And you're like, man, this could mean better things ahead. But Rollins had years on the indie scene. Ambrose had years on the indie scene. Cesaro, years on the indie scene. You know, these were guys that were already coming in that had made their name. You know, there's a lot of different issues here, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And we've seen a lot of guys come up from the NXT level that really haven't made much of an impact. But again, we've also seen other guys like Rusev that have made a tremendous impact. But at the end of the day, you still have to deal with the fact that Cena's the top guy. And again, just like Vince McMahon being at the top isn't changing, Cena being at the top isn't changing anytime soon. And when you factor that in, what good does it really do to have all these young, impressive talents and do all these different nice things here that when you get to the big level, at some point in time, it has to run through Cena, and you know that crap is going to change, and it's not going to change for the better. Until you change some of the principles at the top, i.e. Vince and Cena, until you understand that you could do some of the elements from NXT on a smaller level and take them to a bigger level and have them work, but not pattern your entire show after it, things aren't going to get any better. Until you have better, more consistent communication and cooperation between the developmental system and level and the big league level and system, things aren't going to get a whole lot better. And even when those changes might be able to be implemented, it might be too late. And at that time, the WWE could be behind the 8 ball again. So keep hoping, keep praying, keep wishing, keep having that faith and belief that NXT automatically signals better days ahead for the WWE. But don't fool yourself into believing that that's instantly the case. Even if Vince has final say-so over the current WWE product, Triple H has a lot of say-so himself. You know, he's one of the biggest players on that stage, let's put it that way. And he's been involved with a lot of crap over the years at the big level as well. Just remember that. Keep holding on to whatever you need to hold on to keep yourself believing that better days are ahead. I just wouldn't get too piped up and excited that NXT is necessarily going to be that indication. I just don't believe it is.